You think bears and wolves made outdoor sleeping deadly for ancient peoples, but Native Americans had perfected protection methods so reliable they never feared the night. Our ancestors didn't have the luxury of hotel booking apps when they needed a place to crash for the night. They had to worry about things like bears showing up for an uninvited midnight snack. Makes sense, right? The difference between a good night's sleep and becoming something's dinner often came down to one crucial skill: knowing where not to set up camp. Animal trails were like prehistoric highways, and you definitely didn't want to pitch your tent in the middle of rush hour traffic. These paths, worn smooth by countless hooves and paws, served as main thoroughfares for everything from deer to wolves. Smart campers learned to spot these trails from a distance. Fresh droppings, trampled vegetation, and that distinctive packed earth look were dead giveaways. Setting up shop near these routes was basically sending out dinner invitations to every predator in the neighborhood. Water sources presented another tricky situation. Sure, everyone needs water to survive, but watering holes were like prehistoric social clubs where all the animals hung out. Bears, wolves, and big cats all needed to drink, especially during dawn and dusk hours. The clever move? Camp close enough to access water during safe daylight hours, but far enough away to avoid the evening rush. Then, there's the obvious stuff that somehow wasn't obvious to everyone. Bear dens and wolf territories came with invisible do not disturb signs that only experienced trackers could read. Adult tribe members spent years learning to recognize claw marks on trees, scent markings, and den locations. They'd teach younger folks to look for these warning signs before anyone even thought about unpacking. Campfire placement became an art form all its own. You wanted flames that could light up your surroundings like a prehistoric security system, giving you clear sightlines in every direction. No blind spots meant no surprise visits from curious carnivores. The fire had to be positioned where it could do double duty as both warmth and watchtower. But here's where it gets interesting and slightly paranoid. Before settling down anywhere, the adults would send out scouts to examine every inch of ground around the potential campsite. They'd check for fresh tracks, scratch marks, fur caught on branches, and even subtle changes in how the grass was bent. These weren't casual glances either. We're talking full CSI-level investigations of animal activity. The weird part is how this constant vigilance became second nature. Kids grew up learning to read the landscape like a survival manual, automatically scanning for danger signs before their parents even had to ask. Of course, picking the perfect spot was just the beginning. Once you found that ideal location away from all the midnight visitors, you still had to turn it into something resembling a fortress. Once you found the perfect sleeping spot away from animal highways, the real work began. Building a camp that could actually keep predators out required more than just throwing down some animal skins and calling it a night. The smartest groups arranged their sleeping areas in tight circles. Why circles? Simple geometry, really. When everyone sleeps in a line, bears and wolves can attack from multiple angles. But in a circle, the people on the outer edge naturally become guards, creating a 360-degree early warning system. Plus, if something goes wrong in the middle of the night, everyone can see what's happening. Then, there's the brilliant use of natural barriers. Our ancestors weren't hauling around metal fencing, obviously. Instead, they dragged fallen logs around their camps like makeshift walls. Thorny brush worked even better because most animals hate getting poked as much as we do. These barriers didn't need to be perfect fortresses, just annoying enough to make a hungry wolf think twice about the effort required for dinner. But here's where it gets really clever. In areas crawling with bears, some groups built raised sleeping platforms. Bears are excellent climbers, sure, but they're also lazy when it comes to unnecessary work. A platform 6 feet off the ground meant any bear would have to really commit to the attack. Most of the time, they'd wander off to find easier prey. The entrance situation was equally smart. Instead of leaving camp boundaries unclear, people marked their entry points with carefully placed stones or distinctive branch arrangements. This wasn't decoration, it was strategy. Well-defined entrances meant everyone knew exactly where threats could come from, and guards could focus their attention on specific spots rather than watching everywhere at once. And the weird part is how they positioned individual shelters. Whenever possible, people built their sleeping spots with their backs literally against cliffs or thick tree trunks. This eliminated at least one direction that predators could attack from. You can't get jumped from behind when there's a massive rock wall protecting your back. What made these defensive camps truly effective wasn't any single element. The circular arrangement worked because of the barriers. The barriers work better with marked entrances. The raised platforms made more sense when combined with back protection from natural features. Every piece reinforced the others, creating layered defense systems that turned vulnerable sleeping humans into surprisingly difficult targets. But even the most perfectly designed camp needed something more active to keep the really determined predators away, which brings us to humanity's oldest and most reliable friend in the darkness. Nothing says, "Stay away," quite like a roaring campfire in the dead of night. Our ancestors figured out pretty quickly that most predators have a serious problem with flames. Bears, they hate it. Wolves, even worse. Fire became their ultimate security system, and frankly, it worked better than any modern alarm. The trick wasn't just lighting a fire and calling it good. These people kept those flames burning all night long. Someone always had to stay awake, feeding wood to keep the glow steady. Makes sense, right? A dying fire meant dying protection, and that's when the real trouble started prowling around the edges of camp. But here's where it gets clever. The smoke wasn't just a byproduct, it was part of the plan. That thick, choking cloud masks human scent completely. Animals rely on their noses more than anything else, and when smoke fills the air, they lose their biggest advantage. They can't tell how many people are hiding in that camp or what kind of weapons they might be carrying. Then there's the portable version. Some groups carried torches when they absolutely had to move at night. Imagine walking through pitch-black wilderness with nothing but a flaming stick between you and whatever's watching from the shadows. Takes serious courage, but it kept them alive. The really smart ones spread embers around their sleeping areas, not enough to start a forest fire, but just enough to create a ring of glowing protection. Anyone trying to sneak up would step on hot coals and make enough noise to wake the entire camp. Plus, those embers provided warmth during freezing nights when hypothermia was just as dangerous as predators. And the weird part is how they used ash and smoke as a perimeter defense. They'd sprinkle cold ashes around the camp edges, creating an invisible barrier that animals could smell from dozens of yards away. The scent told every passing predator that humans with fire lived here, and most decided to find easier prey elsewhere. Fire also gave them psychological power. Predators are naturally afraid of flames because wildfires mean death in their world. When humans controlled fire, they controlled something that even the biggest, nastiest animals feared. That's a pretty serious advantage when you're sleeping on the ground with nothing but animal skins for protection. But what happened when fire wasn't enough? When some particularly bold or desperate predator decided to test their defenses anyway? That's when our ancestors had to get creative with sound and movement, turning their camps into something no animal wanted to mess with. Making noise might sound like terrible advice when you're trying to hide from predators, but our ancestors figured out something counterintuitive. Animals hate surprises almost as much as they hate loud, sustained sounds. Most predators prefer easy, quiet prey. Singing became a survival tool after dark. Groups would take turns humming, chanting, or even telling stories loud enough to carry beyond their campsite. The constant human voices created an invisible barrier that said, "Humans here, stay away." Smart wolves and bears usually got the message, but the real genius was in the early warning systems. Picture this: you're dead asleep, and a curious bear starts sniffing around your camp. How would you know? Ancient people hung makeshift rattles and bells on low branches surrounding their sleeping areas. Any animal brushing against these would create enough noise to wake the lightest sleeper. Then there's the startle factor. When an animal did venture too close, sudden explosive sounds worked better than weapons. Clapping hands together sharply, shouting at the top of your lungs, or banging sticks against rocks created chaos that most predators wanted no part of. The key was making yourself seem bigger and more dangerous than you actually were. Well, what about bears that weren't easily intimidated? This is where things got creative. Some groups discovered that flashing bright lights confused and frightened large predators. They'd wave burning branches or reflect firelight off polished stones to create disorienting flashes. Bears especially hated unpredictable light patterns, and the weird part is how effective coordinated noise became when everything else failed. Multiple people shouting different sounds at once, some high-pitched, others low and growling, created an audio nightmare that even aggressive predators couldn't handle. It sounded like a much larger, more dangerous group than it actually was. Let's not forget the portable deterrents. When groups had to move at night, they'd carry rattles, wooden clappers, or anything that made noise while walking. This mobile sound barrier prevented surprise encounters on dark trails. Makes sense, right? Most animals appreciate the heads up that humans are coming. The beauty of noise-based defense was its simplicity. No special tools, no complex preparation. Just human voices, creativity, and the understanding that most wild animals prefer to avoid confrontation entirely. But what happened when noise and light weren't enough? When deterrence failed and predators got too close for comfort? That's when our ancestors had to get really clever with natural chemistry and scent warfare. When noise and fire weren't enough, our ancestors got creative with their noses. Well, technically, they got creative with other things' noses. Animals live in a world ruled by scent, and smart humans figured out how to hack that system. Burning sage wasn't just for ceremonies. The thick, pungent smoke confused predator noses and masked human odors completely. Bears rely heavily on smell to hunt, but when everything smells like burning herbs, they lose their advantage. Clever, right? Some tribes mixed different plants together, creating smoke cocktails that made animals think twice about approaching. But here's where things get weird. Animal fat smeared around camp perimeters actually worked as a warning system. Fat from previous kills told predators that dangerous hunters lived here. Bears especially understood this message. They'd smell the fat, connect it to human hunting success, and usually decided to find easier prey elsewhere. Then there's the urine trick. Sounds gross, but desperate times called for creative solutions. Wolf urine collected from kills could mark territory boundaries, confusing other wolves about pack locations. Bear urine worked similarly. Predators would smell these markers and assume they were entering another animal's territory, which most wanted to avoid. Handmade pepper repellents were another game changer. Crushed hot peppers mixed with animal fat created a paste that burned sensitive noses. Spread around sleeping areas, this mixture made curious animals back off quickly. The burning sensation taught them to associate human camps with unpleasant experiences. Storage became crucial too. Everything that smelled like food went into tightly sealed containers made from animal bladders or thick bark. Clothes, sleeping materials, cooking tools, anything that absorbed food odors got locked away at night. Makes sense when you realize that one leftover meat smell could attract every predator within miles. Some tribes took scent warfare even further. They'd collect droppings from larger predators and scatter them strategically around camps. Smaller animals like coyotes would smell bear droppings and assume a massive bear lived nearby. Even wolves sometimes avoided areas marked with competing predator scents. The really smart groups created scent maps of their territories. They knew exactly where to place different smells for maximum protection, like invisible walls that kept dangers away. Each smell told a different story to passing animals, and humans became masters at writing these scent messages. Well, scent barriers worked great, but what happened when predators ignored all the warnings and showed up anyway? That's when our ancestors needed backup plans that involved four-legged friends and some seriously organized teamwork. Dogs weren't just companions back then. They were literally life insurance policies with 4 legs and sharp teeth. These weren't your modern lap dogs either. We're talking about fierce, loyal animals bred specifically to detect danger and fight off wolves twice their size. Makes sense, right? The watch system worked like a well-oiled machine. Adults took turns staying awake through the night, usually in 2 or 3 hour shifts. Nobody got a full night's sleep, but nobody got eaten either. Fair trade. The person on duty would sit by the fire, listening for unusual sounds and keeping an eye on the dogs. When the dogs' ears perked up or they started growling low, everyone knew something was prowling nearby. Then, there's the fascinating use of domesticated birds as alarm systems. Some groups kept geese or other large birds that would honk and flap wildly at approaching predators. These birds had incredible hearing and could detect movement long before humans noticed anything. Plus, they never fell asleep on the job. But here's where it gets really clever. Certain tribes actually trained their best hunters to imitate wolf howls and bear growls. Why? Well, when a real wolf approached the camp, and heard what sounded like a bigger, more dominant wolf already in the territory, it would usually back off. The weird part is how accurate these imitations had to be. One wrong note, and you might actually attract more predators instead of scaring them away. The buddy system was non-negotiable. Adults never slept alone, and children were always paired with experienced adults. This wasn't just about protection, it was about having someone to wake you up if danger approached while you were deep in sleep. 2 sets of ears and eyes meant double the chance of survival. Let's not forget the communication methods developed between night watchers. Silent hand signals, specific whistle patterns, and even throwing small pebbles became ways to alert others without making noise that might provoke an attack. The person on watch duty had to master these techniques perfectly. Some groups positioned their strongest fighters on the outer edge of sleeping circles, creating human barriers between families and potential threats. These outer guards often stayed partially awake even during their supposed rest periods, ready to spring into action at the first sign of trouble. Dogs would patrol the camp perimeter, marking territory and leaving scent warnings for other predators. Smart groups learned to read their animals' behavior patterns, understanding which barks meant stranger approaching versus immediate danger. Of course, all these protective measures worked best when combined with other strategies, but what happened when everything failed and people found themselves face to face with hungry predators? Our ancestors weren't just surviving day to day, they were thinking months ahead, watching animal patterns like ancient meteorologists tracking storms. Smart move, considering a hungry bear emerging from hibernation could turn your cozy winter camp into a nightmare buffet. Spring meant one thing: move fast or become lunch. Bears wake up cranky and starving after months of sleeping. Wolves start having babies and get extremely territorial. Our ancestors knew this dance well. They'd pack up their winter shelters before the snow even melted completely, heading to safer ground while predators were still groggy and focused on finding easy meals elsewhere. But here's where it gets really clever. Dead animals became mobile operations. Kill a deer? Great. Now drag every bone, scrap of meat, and drop of blood at least half a mile from camp. Why? Because that fresh kill smell travels for miles, basically sending dinner invitations to every carnivore in the area. The timing of hunts wasn't random either. Hunters studied predator schedules like modern commuters checking train times. They'd avoid hunting near wolf dens during pup season. Makes sense, right? Mama wolf protecting babies isn't exactly the neighborly type you want dropping by for a visit. Then there's the seasonal shelter game. Winter shelters were built like fortresses, solid and defensive. Spring shelters, lightweight and portable. Summer meant elevated platforms to avoid ground predators. Fall brought reinforced walls as animals prepared for winter and became more aggressive in their food gathering. Migration patterns changed everything. When caribou moved south, wolves followed. When salmon runs began, bears headed to rivers. Our ancestors became expert at reading these movements, always staying several steps ahead of the predator parade. The really smart groups had scouts. These weren't just random volunteers. They were the best trackers, sent ahead to map predator territories and find safe passage routes. One scout finding fresh wolf tracks could save dozens of lives by redirecting the entire group around dangerous areas. Weather played a huge role too. Harsh winters meant predators would be more desperate come spring. Mild winters, animals stayed more spread out and predictable. Our ancestors adjusted their movement schedules accordingly, sometimes staying put longer or leaving earlier based on how brutal the cold season had been. Even hunting tools changed with seasons. Spring meant lighter weapons for quick escapes. Winter brought heavier, more defensive gear. Each season demanded different survival strategies, and the groups that mastered this seasonal chess game were the ones who lived long enough to pass down their knowledge. What happened when all this careful planning failed and predators still found them? When everything went sideways and a massive predator had already breached the camp, our ancestors didn't panic. They had backup plans for their backup plans. Every sleeping spot came with a predetermined escape route. Not just one, but usually 2 or 3 different paths mapped out in advance. The smartest survivors always slept closest to these exit points, and they made sure everyone knew exactly where to run without having to think about it. Children were taught these routes during daylight hours, walking them repeatedly until muscle memory kicked in. But here's where things get really clever. They never went to bed without weapons within arm's reach. Spears, clubs, sharp stones, even sturdy digging sticks doubled as defensive tools. The key was keeping them close enough to grab in complete darkness without fumbling around. Some groups developed specific sleeping positions that allowed instant access to their makeshift arsenal. Emergency wake-up signals saved countless lives. A sharp whistle, specific bird call, or rhythmic stone tapping could rouse an entire camp in seconds. These weren't random noises either. They were carefully chosen sounds that cut through sleep but wouldn't attract more predators. The weird part is how quickly humans can learn to respond to these signals even while unconscious. Then there were the backup shelters. Smart groups always prepared secondary sleeping areas in trees or on rocky ledges before settling into their main camp. When a bear or pack of wolves showed up uninvited, everyone knew to head for these elevated positions immediately. Tree shelters were particularly effective because most large predators couldn't follow, and the height advantage gave defenders better throwing angles for rocks and spears. Let's not forget the group defense formations they developed. When retreat wasn't possible, survivors would form tight circles with the strongest fighters on the outside. They'd coordinate their movements, creating a wall of noise, weapons, and unified aggression that could overwhelm even large predators. The goal wasn't necessarily to kill the animal, just make it decide that easier prey existed elsewhere. Final desperation tactics included throwing dirt, sand, or ash directly at predators' faces while screaming at maximum volume. Sometimes they'd even throw burning embers from the fire, anything to create confusion and buy precious seconds for escape. These emergency strategies worked because they were simple, practiced, and didn't require split-second decision-making. When your heart is pounding and adrenaline floods your system, complex plans fall apart. But grabbing your spear and running to the tree you've climbed 50 times before, that becomes automatic. Survival wasn't about being fearless, it was about being prepared for when fear tried to take control.